Welcome everybody to the North Yorkshire Safeguarding Children Partnership Masterclass for September 2023. This is an extra one that we're running because the previous one was cancelled, but this one is exploring sharing the screening process, and I would like to welcome today, we've got Hannah Ellingworth, who's our business unit manager, and Victoria Haig to talk to us about that. But before I hand over to them, I just want to make sure that everybody, please be aware of your environmental noise. If you leave your microphones on, then it does come through onto this, and obviously we don't want any confidential information to be inadvertently disclosed. So if you could please make sure that you mute your microphone. This will be recorded as well, so if you don't want, well, we will edit people's faces out, but if you could please make sure you have your cameras switched off as well, that would be very helpful. And if you do have any questions at all throughout the session, if you could just pop those in the chat, that would be great, and then we'll pick them up from there. All of our masterclasses are recorded, as I said, and the slides and the recordings are available from our website. You can either go to the Learning for Professionals part of the page, or you can go to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/@NYSCP. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to them. Sound like a proper YouTuber now, but if you can, because we would like to get that following, and then you will receive updates in terms of when we've got our latest masterclasses. I think by the sounds of it, someone put the microphone on. Could you please?
If she asked, we tell her. But I think there were that many, and how can we stop more than that forgotten? I've got a lot.
Well, I had the conversation with her, and she.
Sorry, if we could please make sure we have our microphone switched off, because it does disrupt the session otherwise, and it's for other people as well as everyone else. So just thank you all for coming today. Don't forget, you can also, following this course, if you wouldn't mind completing a post or course questionnaire, and then NYES will send you a certificate once you've completed that. So without any further ado, I'll hand you over to Hannah Ellingworth, who will now start the training session. Thank you.
Thank you, Hayden. Right, everyone, I'm going to have a go at sharing my screen now. Hayden, can you just let me know if it's working or not?
I'm seeing your screen, yeah.
Brilliant. That's great, thank you. Okay, so welcome everybody. As Hayden said, I'm the manager of the Safeguarding Children's Partnership for North Yorkshire. I'm hoping that everybody's here today to attend the Sharing the Screening Process training. So the aims of today's session are to have a think about the North Yorkshire Safeguarding Children Partnership practice model, to work through a sample of the screening process that must undertake, to consider thresholds for intervention, and to understand consent. As Hayden said, if people have any questions, if you want to put them in the chat bar, or feel free to shout out if there's a question that you have kind of specific to the slide that we're on. I'd like this to kind of try and be as interactive as possible, so please, as I said, feel free to kind of interject when needed. So across the North Yorkshire Partnership, we work under what's called the Strengths in Relationships practice model. So the purpose of this model is to support positive change that continues after agency involvement. And the aim is to create conditions that allow relationships to flourish. The practice system is built to deliver that outcome. And within that model, there's a principle and approach, 3 behaviours, restorative interventions and objectives. So I'm just going to work through them because I think it's useful for people to understand the model within which all practitioners within North Yorkshire work towards. So we work under the one principle of systemic practice. So systemic practice is a relationship-based approach that aims to understand the difficulties and change as occurring within relationships and communication, rather than it being situated within a child or a person within the family. So the aim is that it approaches change through what's called a relational way and aims to bring out respect and stories and strengths of all involved to enable a constructive way forward. The one approach is signs of safety. So signs of safety is a strength-based, solution-focused approach to children's social work, and that's in its broadest term across early help and children's social care. So it's a questioning model that recognises families' own expertise in their situations and takes them on a safety planning journey to their own solutions. The intentional behaviours that professionals work within are, they aim to identify and build family strengths. They want to work as an agent for change to build purposeful and respectful relationships within the professional family network, but also within the family itself. And then the aim is to work as a whole family approach to build lasting family and community relationships. There are 4 restorative interventions that staff make use of. So that's restorative solutions, family finding or family seeing, family group conferencing, and lifelong links. And the 7 objectives within the Strengths in Relationship Practice model are to build long-term stability, to improve resilience and reduce dependence, to manage and reduce risk, to make the child's voice really count, and that's a really key one. To maintain purposeful relationships, it needs to be the least prohibitive intervention, and that's as per the Children Act 1989, which we'll come on to in a little while. And the aim is to reduce times children spend in care if they need to go into care. So the signs of safety approach, as I've mentioned, this is a strengths-based approach that was developed by Andrew Tunnell. It's a child-centred approach that places everybody naturally concerned for the child at the centre of the assessment, decision-making and planning. So, as I said, it's an evidence-based approach, it's strengths-focused, it's child-centred, it's a safety model. And the aim is to give the family every opportunity to come up with and apply their solutions before the professionals offer or impose theirs. Okay, so moving on to thinking about MAST. So MAST, or the multi-agency screening team, are the teams that deal with all the referrals to the Children and Family Service. So they're what we call the front door. The primary function of the MAST is to make the right decision at the right time for families. So within the MAST, there are 6 social workers, 2 children and family workers, a duty early help consultant, 2 detective sergeants, 4 police constables, a safeguarding nurse, 3 business support staff, an early help casework practitioner, 2 practice supervisors and 1 team manager. The team is not an assessment team, but does use the signs of safety model to consider both the presenting concerns in the referral and the context in which these concerns are situated. Working together legislation states that all referrals to the Children and Family Service must be screened within 1 working day. So within the MAST, there are a number of different functions. So as I said, the primary function is to do the screening. So that is the understanding of the referral content and making the right decision for the family at the right time. The MAST also undertake DV triage. So that is any incident of domestic violence within North Yorkshire comes through the MAST and it's triaged with a social work manager and one of the senior police colleagues within the MAST. If the concerns reach a threshold that needs screening, then the contact comes to one of the social workers or children and family workers for screening. MAST manage the MACE level 1, so it might be that some colleagues here have attended either MACE level 1 or MACE level 2. So that's the work that goes on within the Children and Families Service about child exploitation. MAST hold a CAMS meeting, so that's a daily meeting with CAMS and Compass and other emotional wellbeing services, where again a multi-agency discussion is had around the presenting concerns for the child or the family, and to think about whether there is a requirement, perhaps on top of children and families intervention, for support around the child's emotional health and well-being. There is a duty early help consultant, as I've said, in the MAST. They are there to support referrers, primarily if it's a school referrer. The early help consultant will make contact with the school to discuss the referral in more detail. And again, I'm hoping that certainly some of you on the call will have had contact with your early help consultant at one time or another. MAST deliver training, and they also support the Customer Resolution Centre. So in terms of the MAST process, so all referrals come through the contact centre. So MAST themselves don't take the referrals, but the referrals come through the contact centre, who then process them, and they go into what's called the MAST contact tray. Each referral is then RAG rated, red, amber or green. Now this RAG rating is a really quick scan of the presenting concerns to establish if on the face of it there are any immediate safeguarding concerns. If there are immediate safeguarding concerns, there's a process that's followed that we won't go into. If there aren't immediate safeguarding concerns, the social work manager who has looked at that information will record what's called an allocation note. So the allocation note is there really to support whoever does the screening to understand various actions that need to be undertaken in order to make the right decision for the family. So an example of an allocation note might be for the screener to make contact with the referrer to try and gather some more information, or it might be to make use of certain policies or procedures that we have on the Safeguarding Partnership website. So it might be to look at, for example, the pre-birth guidance. It almost always will also say to make contact with the family to explain the referral to them and to understand their perspective on the concerns, and to establish whether they feel there is any support that's required for them. Screeners will, so if we move on to the screening process, so whoever is screening the referral will look at the information, they will look at the allocations notes, and as part of their work, they will consider any previous children and family support, and their aim is to triangulate any historical concerns that we've got with the information in the referral to help make the right decision. Screeners, once they've gone through the process of screening, so reading the referral, understanding any history, asking for multi-agency checks if that's required from either health or police or both, once all of that work has been undertaken, the screener will outcome the referral based on all of their work. Now, once the screener has outcomed the screening, it will go back into a tray where one of the managers will pick it up, and they will add an approvals note. So that approvals note is there for a number of reasons. Number one, it's to quality assure the information. It's to make sure that a social work manager has had oversight of the decision making. And it's also to make sure that the decision is believed to be correct for that family. Now, if the decision's not approved, a case discussion takes place with the person that screened the information and possibly multi-agency partners if they've been involved in the decision making. One of the really key things about working in the MAST is that ability to have professionally challenging conversations. The aim of this, again, we'll come on to this in a bit more detail, but the aim of this isn't to put people in a position of who's right and who's wrong. The aim is to really think about different perspectives and what might be going on for that family, and have a real clear discussion about people's views about next steps. So within the MAST, they undertake something called group screening. Now, this is a multi-agency meeting with police, health and local authority. Now, the approach used within group screening is something called interventive interviewing. And this is a systemic technique that uses systemic questions to understand the issues and to think about a solution. So must use this to make the best decision for a family. Now, the first question that happens within group screening, so if a case is going to be group screened, either the social worker or the children and family worker who's screening the case will come in to present the information. The first question to the group is around the proportionality of sharing multi-agency information. So if the referrals come to MAST with consent from the family or somebody that has PR for that child, then it is legally okay for us to share multi-agency information. If we don't have consent from the family, then there needs to be a discussion about whether it's proportionate to ask for agency checks or not. The aim of group screening is to really consider multiple perspectives and introduce difference. So what happens in the meeting is that a social worker will share, or children and family worker, sorry, will share the information that they've got in the referral. The chair would then go round asking for multi-agency information. So it might be that police hold some information on niche. It might be that System 1 for health have some information. And we would look at the historical children and families information as well. At that point, we call that the information gathering stage. We then move on to thinking about what the child might tell us. So MAST don't work directly with children and young people, but we are always conscious that we are working for the best interests of the child in the referral. So what we like to do in the group screening meeting is to think about, if the child were in the room with us, what might they tell us? We will then also move on to hypothesizing. Now, the aim of hypothesizing, as I've said, really is to introduce difference. So it might be that somebody has a very clear hypothesis about what they think might be happening. And as a chair or as an experienced person within that group screening meeting, somebody else might say, okay, what if we flipped that hypothesis and it was exactly the opposite of what you'd said? You'll see that that helps to think about alternative hypotheses. And there is a systemic kind of principle about hypothesizing, and that they say don't fall in love with your hypothesis. So the aim is not for somebody in the meeting to be right and somebody in the meeting to be wrong. It is really about thinking about those multiple perspectives. Then, as part of the group screening, a decision or an outcome is needed, and that is a group decision based on all of the people that are in the meeting. So what I thought might be helpful or interesting maybe is to go through a referral that was received in the MAST. It is a real life referral, so it's been anonymised, but just in case there's anybody in here who recognises any of the information, please can I just ask that you don't share any personal details for the family. So a referral was received, and it stated, a few months ago, a member of the public expressed to the referrer, who is an anonymous caller, that Betty was increasingly miserable. They explained that when her stepfather was around, she was completely silent. There was the insinuation that she was scared of her stepfather. A few days ago in the local pub, someone was speaking about how Betty's siblings had joined the army. It was thought that they had done this to completely get away from their stepfather. This referral was made from a third party to North Yorkshire Police, and then North Yorkshire Police have shared what's called a PPN, which is their recording form, to the MAST. So on the PPN, it said Betty's sibling had recently come back to visit and left the family home after one night to stay with another family, as they were so angry at how the stepfather was treating Betty's mum. It was thought that there may have been violence expressed from stepfather to Betty's sibling. It was also said that their stepfather is violent towards mum and possibly Betty. And a lot of people in the local pub have spoken about it, and someone was there who knew the family quite well. So what I thought might be useful just to start with, does anybody have any thoughts, first of all, about whether it is proportionate for us to ask for multi-agency checks based on the information that we've got, and as in this instance we don't have consent from the family at this time? Do people just want to say yes or no in the chat bar, please, or shout out? Hayden, are you all right just to give me a clue on what people are saying?
Yes, certainly.
Thank you.
People are starting to come in. Yeah, people are generally saying yes.
Okay, thank you. So we also thought that it was appropriate to ask for agency checks. It seems proportionate, I think, given that we were worried that number one, that Betty might have been experiencing domestic abuse within her home. And there was also, I think, a concern around whether Betty was being physically hurt. So in terms of the North Yorkshire Police checks, so niche checks were undertaken during the group screening, and they described the information that was in the referral. As I said, it had come via them, and then there was a little bit more information that said, so the anonymous person who had reported the initial concerns had been back in touch with Betty, who had apparently told this third party that mum and her partner have now sorted things out, and that things seemed better between them. The police officer spoke to both adults separately, and they advised that there had been no assault, that they were tired and grumpy as they were both working really long hours. It appears on the report that Betty had also been spoken with by officers on her own. Now, she had a different version of events to the adults. So she has clarified that there was a physical incident between stepdad and mum, and she believed that mum had had her hair pulled. She states that she didn't see what happened, but she did hear it. Mum and stepdad, according to North Yorkshire Police, are graded as medium risk of domestic abuse. When there is a domestic abuse incident, each incident is graded low, medium or high, and they are as they sound in terms of risk. So we moved on and we asked for checks from health colleagues as well. So they check a system called System 1, and it was found that Betty was Universal Services with the Healthy Child team. She was under CAMS and has an appointment for initial assessment, which seemed to be focused on attachment difficulties. Within the information from CAMS, they advised also there should be consideration of a autism spectrum disorder assessment, and System 1 indicated that a referral has been made for this. What they'd also said was that Betty had had angry outbursts that had been lifelong. So, as I said, part of the screening process is also to consider any children and families' involvement historically or kind of currently. And the information that comes within the referral is then triangulated with that information. So I'll read through this and you'll see, I think, how relevant finding out the children and families' history is to the current concerns that we have in this referral. So in February 19, we can see that Betty told the school that she'd heard an argument between mum and stepdad, and that he had smashed a glass, and this had led to Betty being hurt. So at this point, the family were offered support under child in need. So it would appear that parents or mother had consented to support from the Children and Families Service. And when the case was closed as child in need, support was offered by Early Help. The closure summary states that Betty speaks almost daily to her dad and has a close friend that she talks to, especially when things are difficult at home. She has a good relationship with staff at her school who she feels she can tell her worries to. And we know, don't we, about how important it is that children and young people have good relationships with school staff particularly. So in September 21, there was a school referral with Betty having reported concerns that stepdad had been violent to mum. Again, this was transferred to the family assessment and support team, so that's the social work teams. However, at that point, mum had declined ongoing support. We will come on to this when we think about consent, but in order for Children and Family Service to offer support at child in need level, there needs to be consent from a person with PR. So the closure summary for that involvement states it would have been preferable to offer a short period of support through child in need. However, mum feels that she doesn't need any at the moment. Mum's been given information and advice about other services who could support her and her partner, including IDAS and Horizons. So we'll see then more recently in 2022, Betty had shared that things were no better since the last period of involvement. She states that mum and partner were shouting at each other and that Betty stays out of the way. So that information was transferred back to the Early Help consultant for a request for them to help school support Betty. A further referral in 2022 was an anonymous referral around stepdad being violent again in the home and that Betty was miserable. On this instance, the outcome was information and advice. So one of the outcomes from MAST, if there isn't consent, needs to be information and advice. So what that means is that the family need to be made aware of any referrals that they've had made for them. The screeners, as part of their work, will make attempts to contact families and to try and gain consent. However, if it's not possible, the referral is closed as information and advice. And then we'll see in September 22, Betty had previously disclosed an assault by her mum's partner, which was looked at and no further action by police. Betty said that the situation hasn't improved and she's quite often going without food. Okay, so that gives you a kind of general overview of the information for Betty, but also the information that is shared within the group screening process. So,
sorry, there is a question about how old was Betty?
Thank you, that's a useful question. So Betty was 15. So if we come on then, so it's going to be difficult with this amount of people, but if we think about what questions do people have, so if we're going through the group screening process and we are at the information gathering stage at the moment, what further questions would people like to know the answers to? So it's useful, isn't it, to understand her age, because had she been 4, perhaps that might make our perspective on the concerns different to her being 15, possibly. Again, please feel free to shout out questions or type them, whichever you would prefer.
Nothing in the chat as of yet.
Okay, so hopefully then we've...
Is there a wide support network close to the family? Is one that's been added?
Is there a... Sorry, Hayden, I missed that bit.
Is there a wider support network close to the family? And then also, is information gathered from IDAS about any involvement?
Okay, so No, we don't have access to IDAS systems. I think in one of the periods of intervention, I think it was recorded that mum had been signposted to IDAS, but no, we wouldn't be able to see whether mum had been engaging with IDAS or partner had been engaging with IDAS. In terms of wider support, I don't think we know that based on the information that we've got. We would certainly want to know about that, wouldn't we? Because that would help us understand what the safety might be for Betty. Does she have, is there a safety plan? If there is a safety plan, who is part of that safety plan? Does she have a neighbour that she can go to, or a grandma or something like that? So yes, you're exactly right to think about what that wider support might look like for her. So
there's another couple of ones on there as well. So how does Betty perceive her stepdad? Does she feel threatened by him? And also, sounds like domestic abuse and neglect. What is Dad's current involvement?
Yeah. So it's interesting to think about her biological father, isn't it? Again, in one of the periods of intervention, it looks like there was a recording around her being able to have kind of fairly consistent contact with her father. We see, unfortunately, still quite often that fathers get missed in some of the referrals. So it's really important when we're thinking about that safety and kind of support network for the family to think about both the maternal side but also the paternal side. And then how does Betty perceive her stepdad? So I think that nicely moves us on to what we consider in the next part of the group screening meeting, which is around Betty's views. So what might Betty tell us if she were sat in the room with us now? What might she tell us? So we've got some quite clear views from her, haven't we, in terms of saying that she stays out of the way of stepdad, that she I think feels worried about some of his behaviours. So I wonder if Betty might say that she feels scared when he's there. She might say that she wishes mum wasn't in a relationship with him. She might say that she wishes that she could live with her dad. Or it might be that she says, I really like my stepdad most of the time, but I don't like some of his behaviours. Okay, the next point in the meeting is that we move on to thinking about hypothesizing. Now that can build on what we think the child or young person might say if they were in the room with us. So if we think about Betty, does anybody want to have a go at hypothesizing about what might be happening for her? Again, shout out or type it into the chat.
Joe's put witnessing DV.
Yeah.
Real fear of her mum being hurt.
Yeah.
Joanne also put, are there any records of for siblings? I think that was in relation to the previous question, though.
Yeah, I think we've got there's an older sibling in the family. I think it states in the referral, doesn't it, that older sibling didn't want to be in the family home anymore. Yeah.
Westcliff head teachers put might be missing her brother and might have been a protective factor for her mum.
Yeah. So perhaps we have a hypothesis that that Betty is seeing or experiencing domestic abuse in her house, and we would be worried that if this continues, Betty might be hurt, or she might see her mum hurt, and this could impact on her emotional health and well-being. That seems like a reasonable hypothesis, doesn't it, based on the information that we've got? Now, I said at the beginning that part of the process within group screening is to try and introduce difference, and the point is not to be right. So what I'm going to say something that might end up sounding controversial, but if we flipped that hypothesis and said Betty isn't experiencing domestic abuse, Betty might not have a positive relationship with her dad, with her stepdad, sorry. Betty might wish that her parents were still together, and so Betty might be saying things about her stepdad that are untrue in order to undermine her mum and stepdad's relationship. Now, as I said, I'm not saying that because I think that that's true. I'm saying it because it's important to introduce that idea of difference. It's difficult, obviously, presenting in this format because I can't see kind of people's responses. So if you want to say anything about that, please feel free to add something into the chat.
Joanne said other community members may also suspect abuse, and Helen said look at other evidence.
So we've looked, haven't we, at the information from police, and we've looked at information from health. I think the health information is interesting, isn't it? Because we hear in that Betty's displaying some angry behaviours. That might be because of her experiences within her family home. We're also told that she is going to have an initial assessment with CAMHS, which indicates that she is struggling in some way with her emotional or mental health, but we don't understand the context of that at this point.
There's also, Chris has said that there's evidence about Betty's brother also doesn't want to stay in the home.
Yeah. So again, that might well be because he, as it says in the referral, doesn't like the information, what's happening at home. It might also be that he too wants parents to stay together, perhaps. I think it also might be, we know that this referral has come through from a third party. We know that there have been community discussions in the local pub. Now, what we don't know at the moment is what relationship the referrer has either with Betty or with Betty's mum. So it might be that the person that's made this referral didn't have Betty or her mum's best interests at heart. It might also be that she very much did. You know, she might be part of their safety network, and she might be a really close family friend who is kind of really worried about what's happening for Betty. So I suppose the point really is to really think about all the different things that might be going on for Betty. Then at this point within the group screening meeting, what we would do is we would make a decision on outcome based on all of the information that we know. But before we have a look at that, what I thought would be useful next is to have a bit of a look at legislation. So in terms of outcomes, MAST can outcome in a number of different ways. So MAST can indicate that a strategy meeting within the local area team needs to be convened. Consent is not required from the family at that point. It might be that MAST say that a children and families assessment's required, consent is needed from a family at that point. It might be that targeted early help from a children family worker is required. Again, consent's needed for early help. It might be that single agency support is required. So it might be the early help consultant makes contact with school to understand from their perspective what things look like for the child and to see whether there's any support that they might be able to provide or are currently providing. MAST can refer to the Healthy Child team for support around emotional health, and MAST can outcome as information and advice, as I've mentioned before. Each contact has to be outcomed within 24 hours, as I said, and that's in legislation. So just on the screening process, so each screener through the day will be allocated a number of screenings to complete. That's usually between 10 and 12. While not every referral is group screened, because it's obviously not possible to spend that amount of to do that for every single referral, every referral that we get goes through that process when it's being screened. So each screener will read the information, they will consider all of the history, they will think about the child's voice, they will think about hypothesizing, and then they will make an outcome for that family. It might be that MAST have 60 referrals to screen in a day, or it might be that there's 100 to screen. Each regardless of number, they all need to be screened within 24 hours, and each referral receives the same amount of consideration, as I've explained, kind of through the group screening process. So in terms of MASS, so when they're making a decision, they need to work within the primary legislation for working with families. This is the Children's Act and working together legislation. So if we're thinking about significant harm, so this is the only point at which it is possible to dispense with family consent. Now, significant harm is defined in the Children's Act 1989, defined by the Children's Act. It's not specifically defined, but it is ill treatment, including sexual abuse and physical abuse, or impairment of health or development, as compared to a similar child. And while it doesn't set out a specific criteria, it encourages people to think about the degree and the extent of harm, the duration of harm, the frequency that harm is occurring, and the extent of premeditation, and the presence or degree of threat, coercion, sadism, or bizarre and unusual events. So within, has it come back, Hayden? It just looked like it went off then. Within,
still on there.
Is it on? Thank you. Within the MAST, we make use of what's called the Framework for Decision Making. Now, this is a document that is accessible on the North Yorkshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership website. I'd recommend people to have a look at it because it helps think about thresholds for intervention. If MAST indicate that a strategy meeting is convened, the strategy meeting is a multi-agency meeting. It needs to be convened within 72 hours, and the purpose of that meeting is to bring professionals together, so social workers, police, health, teachers, other relevant professionals, and allow the sharing of information about that child or family. Now, if within a strategy meeting, there are two possible outcomes. They either are for Section 47 inquiries to be undertaken by the local authority or not. So if the decision has been made that the presenting concerns reach a threshold for intervention, at that point, as I've said, you can dispense with the family's consent. However, that decision isn't taken lightly, as it's obviously much better to work with a family where there's consent, because research tells us that outcomes for children are much better when there is collaborative working. Now, if it's felt that Section 47 inquiries, the threshold is not met for that, it might be that the child can be considered under Section 17. However, consent is required for all intervention outside of significant harm. So there would need to be consent from a family to work under Section 17. Now, if a family doesn't consent to children and family service involvement, at this point, the intervention would end, as we heard actually in one of the historical bits of information about Betty. Now, I understand that this can be a really challenging position for professionals, particularly those that work with and know the family. However, as I've said, children and families have to work within the legislation. And I think for me, this highlights the real importance of talking to a family prior to making a referral where possible. If a family do consent to child in need, that means that they would have an allocated social worker. That social worker would undertake a children and families assessment, and then what we know as a SMART plan is created and then reviewed every 6 weeks. So that the plan needs to be measured and timely and appropriate to that family's needs. Okay. Another outcome potential outcome for the MAST is early help. Now, the Department for Education defines early help not as a designated team. It talks about it in its broadest sense. It's the way that everyone works together to support the needs of families. So we've got in North Yorkshire our continuum of need, which is the windscreen wiper diagram that you can see on the screen. Early help is the response offered by all services in contact with children, young people and families when an unmet need is identified, but that it is not a safeguarding threshold. All these services within the early help continuum are support that's provided to families who don't reach threshold for statutory intervention. Now, it might be that a family is never going to reach threshold for statutory intervention, but it might be that at some point in time, some level of support is needed. Everybody knows, don't they, in family life, it's incredibly unpredictable, and things might be going really well for somebody 1 minute, and then a very significant incident happens, and that changes the dynamics in the family. Now, within North Yorkshire, we, while understanding that early help is a way of working, we do also have an early help service. So within that, and from a MAST perspective, we are able to refer for targeted intervention from a children and family worker. Now, there's no clear definition really about what a children and family worker will do or is able to do. They are able to work with a level of risk, but they don't work with safeguarding unless it's under an intervention and the family are being managed by a social worker, but that is separate to the early help service. So a children and family worker will offer support around parenting, so routines, boundaries and consequences. They'll look at low risk when it comes to child sexual exploitation or child criminal exploitation. They'll support where there's domestic abuse, if this is low risk. They'll support where there is parental conflict, and they are also able to coordinate what's called team around the family meetings. The children and family workers complete assessments, and they also work within the kind of SMART plan. We also have a team of early help consultants. Early help consultants are there to support schools in completing early help assessments. They're there to provide guidance around how to work with families. They don't case hold, so they are there in a consultative role. Within the MAST, there are 2 children and family workers, and they screen the early help cases where possible. They screen the early help cases. They don't screen safeguarding cases. They will screen early help cases, and this is to ensure that there is an early help specialism within the front door, so that the kind of gold standard within the MAST is that the social workers screen the referrals that have a safeguarding component, and the children and family workers screen the concerns that have an early help component. So now, I don't know if people want to say, now that we've talked about the possible outcomes, do people want to have a go at saying their views about the support required for Betty? I think there is a question of consent within this, so it might just be worth thinking about that as well when we're thinking about what the outcome might be. Again, please feel free to type or shout out.
Just waiting for something to appear in the chat.
Thank you.
Burton Leonard said ongoing nurture support in the school. Georgina has said, as I recall, early help was refused previously. Is that right? Nikki put child in need to be put in place, and Helen said section 17. Okay,
thank you, everyone. It's really interesting to get a kind of a cross section of views there. So I think if we had consent for support, based on the information that we had, I would imagine that we would have asked our early help colleagues to offer some support around maybe some safety planning, some family networking work, and some support for Betty around her emotional health. Now, I think we saw I think it was in 2019, that the family had at that point worked with early help. So as I said, if we had consent, we would be able to offer that support. If we were going to go down the route of Section 17, again, we would need support in order to offer that. So if Mum had said that she didn't consent to any support at all, then we would have had to have closed the contact as information and advice. However, I think at that point there might have been a requirement perhaps for a conversation with school, given that school were already aware of some of the concerns, to see about whether there was some emotional support that could be offered, as somebody has helpfully suggested. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. Does anybody have any questions or queries?
There's no questions coming in the chat.
Okay, so I'll just go through last couple of bits. So we are the North Yorkshire Safeguarding Children Partnership, and we have a fabulous website that Hayden maintains. So please visit that. We've got all of our policies and procedures are on there, and other bits of useful information. The partnership produce procedures, practice guidance and 1-minute guides that can be really useful. We deliver monthly multi-agency training, as you know, because you're here. And we do webinars, events and e-learning. We're delivering, Hayden is delivering and setting up some podcasts which will be available to access. These are our key links. So we've got a website, we've got Twitter, we've got Facebook, we've got YouTube. I believe we're going to have LinkedIn, Hayden, at some point, and we've got the podcasts as well.
Yeah, that's right. And we've actually just released the latest podcast yesterday, which was the podcast version of the e-bulletin, and that's also available on our YouTube channel as a video as well. So there's an audio and a video version of it which you can share in your teams.
Super, thank you. And then I've just put some wider reading at the end of the presentation for anybody that would like to go and find out a bit more information about some of the stuff that we've kind of touched on here. The interventive interviewing, I think, is particularly interesting, but that might just be me. Okay, so thank you very much, everybody.